this is Megan from megansmedadesigns.com, and today I'm going to show you how I make a bead embroidered headband, and we'll start with some of the supplies. This is what I'm going to use for the base of my bead embroidery. This is just a stiff white felt. You could use any kind of soft leather or pleather or foam type material, just so long as it doesn't fray on the edges, and it will stay pretty durable, but is also easy enough for you to take your skinny beaded needle to go in and out of. And then obviously there's the beading needle and the Nymo Japanese grade beading thread. Glue, I'm using E6000 rubber cement glue. This is the best that I have found to work with these projects. Some of the sparkles, I'm using crystal rhinestone chain. And you can use, whichever elements you decide on. I'm also using some of these half-cut synthetic pearls. And then for the beads, I'm using 11 O's for size. These are short hex cuts. Round crystal. And opaque white pearl. So that's 3 different kinds of beads, but they're all in the same realm of crystal or white. And then finally you'll need some kind of backing. I'll probably be using a pleather backing. And then some ribbon to tie the headband around. So for starters, I'm going to cut a piece of the felt for the headband base. I'm going to just measure out about 10 to 11 inches, which, usually goes about to the end a little bit more. So I'll go to about there and about yay wide, just to make it wide enough to cover my design and give me some room to wiggle. So if you can imagine, that's going to be the base of the headband. And you can use either side. Now I'm going to put down my decorative elements before I start any beading. So first I'm going to add the crystal rhinestone chain by taking my glue, starting at the end, and drawing a gradual zigzag pattern from the top to the bottom. And I'm all for more natural, artistic forms, so if you want these to be more uniform, you can get out your measuring tape and make sure that each wave is the same size, but I don't really pay too much attention to that part. So now I'm adding the back of the rhinestone chain to the glue, so the sparkle end showing, obviously. That's the part that really adds to the visual of this entire piece. And it's what we'll be beading around. You can kind of smoosh it on the glue to get the look that you're going for. And then I'm just going to cut the end off here. And now, in each of these valleys, in between the different waves, I'm going to add a spot of glue for the half-cut synthetic pearls. The only thing that you want to make sure is that you add about the same amount of distance in between the pearls and the rhinestones on each place. So if it's about a width of one row of beads, then you'll want it to stay consistently one row of beads all across. This one looks like it's about 2. So it'll be 2 rows of beads in between the rhinestone chain and the synthetic pearl. My scissors all sticky. And I'm using all white and crystal colors because I'm making a bridal headpiece. But I do encourage you to explore and use colors of rhinestones, of beads, and of pearls or rhinestones to match whatever outfit you need a headpiece for. And there we go. That's the base of our headband. Now you'll just want to let that glue dry for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll get on to the beading. Okay, so after you've given your rhinestones and your flat back pearls some time to dry, we'll go ahead and start with the bead embroidery. So to get started, I've just threaded my beading needle with a fair, nice, long amount of thread. That way I don't run short, but you can add whatever amount's comfortable for you. You can always thread it again. It's certainly not going to last throughout this entire process. So just to start, I'm going to push my needle up from the underside of the backing, right up against the rhinestones, without pulling it all the way through, leaving a tail end of thread coming out of the back side. Now I'm going to thread 3 of the opaque white seed beads. You can do 2 or 3 or 4. I prefer 3 as a good starting point. And then I'm going to, while holding that back tails to make sure it doesn't go all the way through, I'm laying those beads up against the rhinestones and then threading my needle back through the backing at the end point of those 3 beads that I just added. Now on the other side, I have the tail end of my thread and the long ends. It's kind of hard to see because they're white, but I'm going to tie them together in a double square knot. And then I'm going to trim the axis of that thread tail. Now the key thing about bead embroidery is when you go back up through the backing, you thread to the center point of the last bit of beads that you just added, so up next to the second, or right before the first of those last 3 beads I added. And then I'm going to thread through. Again, it's kind of hard to see because they're white on white, but I'm threading back through and coming out of the beads that I just added. And this is my starting point for my bead embroidery. Now from this point where I'm coming out, I'm going to keep embroidering beadwork along this outside edge of the rhinestones. I'll proceed by adding 3 additional opaque white beads, or excuse me, 6, but you could add anywhere from 2 to 8. I prefer 4 or 6, as if you get too many at once it becomes less sturdy. A smaller amount, especially for tight areas, can be more stable. Tight areas meaning like on the inside of these curves, for example, or while you're going around small circles, then I'll probably do 4 beads at a time. But for now I'm doing 6. So I thread those on, lay them against the rhinestones, and put my needle back through at the point where that amount of beads ends. Then I put my needle back up through the center point, or after the 3rd bead of the previous 6 that I just added. And thread it back through the additional 3 beads from the 6 beads that I just added. And now I will continue to do that, adding 6 beads at a time for the rest of the area around the chain of rhinestones. Okay, after you have beaded the white opaque beads all the way around the rhinestone chain, thread back through some of that beadwork until you reach a point right next to one of the flat back pearls. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the clear round seed beads and bead around the flat back pearl. And because it's a tighter circle, I'm going to add 4 of the beads at a time instead of 6, but you can use whatever you feel is comfortable. And the cool thing about bead embroidery is it's not so much about exact number of beads or exactly what size they are. Because if you're using slightly larger beads, you can just add less. If you're using slightly smaller beads, you just add more. And you can add as many per stitch as you feel is sturdy. And so this is a very relaxing alternative to regular bead weaving where you have to count or follow a pattern, 2 blue beads, 1 red bead, etc. You just kind of have to go with the flow when you're bead embroidering. And so you don't have to pay as much attention, you don't have to add and subtract, do a bunch of math. Not that that's bad, but sometimes you just want to stitch on something while you're watching TV or listening to an audiobook, which is my favorite thing to do when I'm beading. So it's kind of a nice alternative. So for that last bit around the half purl, just 2 beads fits, and then I thread back through the end where I started. And that creates a circle. Now what I'm going to do is embroider some of the hex cut beads around this rim, but I'm going to add them one at a time facing outward, so like a sunburst pattern around the area that I just added where they can fit. So starting from this edge, and then I add a single hex cut bead, so it's facing outward, and I will continue to do that all the way around. Now after I'm done adding that burst of hex beads around the pearl bead, I'm going to thread back through the white opaque beads that I added in the previous steps and do what I did with this pearl bead around all of the other ones in the design before I move on to the next step. Okay, so after you have beaded around each of the pearls and surrounded them with the hex cut beads, and I've gone all the way up and down the pattern, so now I have my thread and it's coming out of the back end, and it doesn't matter where you end up when you're done with this step. So it's coming out of the back end, and I'm just going to make sure that I don't accidentally cut my thread when I go through this next step. So now what I'm going to do is cut around my beaded design, but I want to leave just enough of the backing, just about the width of another row of beads, because I'm going to add one final row after I'm done cutting this out. But I want to cut it out first so that the final row of beads will cover the lip so you won't see any of the backing. And so just securing my thread to make sure that I don't accidentally cut it as I cut this out. And if you do accidentally cut some of your stitching on the back, you'll just have to go back in and repair that area by tying your thread again to the area that you cut and rebeading that portion, which it's kind of a pain, but it's not the end all if it happens. Which I just actually did that. I accidentally cut some stitching right here, so I'll have to go in and rebead that area before I can continue on to the next step. So it happens to all of us. And you may notice that I'm using a smaller pair of scissors. I just find it easier to do the tighter cuts and shorter turns with the smaller pair. But usually I find that if I cut out my design before adding the final row, there's much less of a chance of cutting one of your back end stitches. And also it makes it easier to cover your entire backing with beading than if you try to cut around your design after you're completely done beading it. So I'm going to go back and fix that spot where I messed up right here. And then what I'm going to do is bead around the entire design to cover up this lip, with some of the clear crystal beads. And then we'll go on to the next step. So now I have added a final layer of beadwork around the cutout piece, and this final layer was the clear crystal seed beads. And I went all the way around the design and tied my thread on the back. So now the bead embroidery piece is complete and ready to be attached to a backing and the ribbon for the headband tie. So to attach the ribbon, all I'm going to do is flip the piece so the back is facing up, and then I'm going to glue a long piece of ribbon, long enough so it can tie around your head in a bow or comfortably. You could even use a piece of ribbon that's long enough to tie the headband around your waist as a sash or a belt. So you might want to measure the ribbon around your head just to make sure you're comfortable with how long it is. And also it's a good idea once you cut the ribbon to use a lighter and apply some heat at the edges when you're done so that they don't start to fray. So fold your piece of ribbon in half. You know, there's the right side and the wrong side, and the right side of this ribbon is shiny and the wrong side is dull, so we want to make sure the shiny side shows up. So I'm taking the center of the ribbon, placing it approximately, it will go the center of the piece so that both of the sides are fairly even, so that it'll be easier to tie. Now all I'm doing is taking some of my E6000 glue and running it down the center of the back of the bead embroidered piece. Putting the right side down, setting the ribbon on top of that stream of glue, and patting it in place. And we'll let that dry for just a few minutes, and then we'll add the backing. Okay, after a few minutes, once the ribbon is securely glued on there, go ahead and cut out a piece of backing. I'm using a pleather backing. It's very thin, metallic on one side, regular fabric on another side. But the most important thing is that you use a backing that doesn't fray or won't fray very easily. I'll be sealing the edges of this backing just to ensure that it doesn't fray. But now what I'm going to do is apply another layer of E6000 glue to the back of the embroidered headpiece and the ribbon that's on top of it, and then glue the backing on the top. And what's so great about the E6000 glue is it's a flexible rubber cement glue, so it works good for headbands because they need to bend and shape to your head. So there won't be any difficulties with cracking or any other issues like that. Just make sure that you get the edges as best you can without having too much excess glue glop over, and if there is excess glue you can just wipe it off. Not a big deal. Press that. Make sure all the edges are good and attached, and then I'm going to let this dry for at least 30 minutes or more, probably about an hour just to make sure, and then I'll go back and cut the backing from the edge of the embroidery when I come back. So now that the glue has had a while to dry, I'm cutting out the backing from behind the beaded piece, just right along the edge. And I'm opting not to cut the part where the ribbon shows, but you can if you want. Either way works fine. Now if you're using a leather or a non-woven material as your backing, then you won't need to worry about any kind of fraying. But since this is technically a woven material, I'm going to coat the outer edges with a layer of some clear fingernail polish, just to ensure that it doesn't fray after heavy use, being worn a lot, that kind of thing. You want to do whatever you can to prolong the use of your finished pieces. So, basically, there you have it. There's the bag, cut to the edge. Trim off any of the little bits that are still hanging out. And there we go. So this can be tied around the forehead, on top of the head, or around the waist as a sash. And what I really like about these ribbon headbands versus the metal ones, not that you couldn't attach this to a metal headband if you want to, but what I do like about them is they're very comfortable. So a lot of people who have larger heads or normally get headaches from headbands, they say they enjoy these ones as an alternative. And just as an additional tip, when you're trying on your new headband, if you want to make sure that it doesn't slip, because especially if your backing is more slippery like this one, just apply a bobby pin onto either end after you tie it in when you're around your head, and it should stay in place. This is going to be part of my new 2014 bridal collection, which I'll be announcing at my website, megansbeadeddesigns.com.